My son looked at me after his father's funeral and said, "Don't expect a penny from Dad's 68 million." His voice was calm. Mine wasn't. The house still smelled of lilies and greed. And that's when I knew this wasn't family anymore. They hadn't even cleared the dishes from the post-funeral meal. My grandson wandered around peeling bright sticky notes and slapping them on everything he wanted. A green one on the piano, a pink one on the china cabinet, a yellow one on my favorite chair by the window. Each note screamed the same word in black ink: mine. He laughed as he did it, proud of his little claims. His sister followed with her phone out, scanning walls. "We'll knock this down," she said. "Make it brighter. Maybe a spa room." I stood there holding my cup of cold tea, the steam long gone. The house felt colder than it had in years, like even the walls were eavesdropping. My daughter-in-law drifted through with a tray of champagne glasses and a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "We're celebrating your husband's legacy," she said sweetly. "He built an empire, and now it's our turn to carry it forward." Then, softer, but sharp enough to cut. "And finally, clean out the ghosts." Laughter followed. Not grief, not respect, just laughter echoing through the rooms I once filled with warmth. I went to the kitchen for water. My reflection in the window looked like someone else, eyes dull, mouth drawn thin. Outside, the roses were wilting. No one had watered them since the day he died. They had been his pride once. Now they drooped, forgotten. On the counter sat a folded letter I had carried in my purse for years. It was sealed, notarized, and older than any of their memories. I ran a finger along its edge and felt my heartbeat steady. They thought I was weak, but I had been patient. While they built their greed, I built my moment. As I turned off the kitchen light, I heard my grandson shout, "When she's gone, we'll remodel everything." My son laughed. "Don't worry, she won't last long." They didn't know I was still standing in the doorway. They didn't know I heard every word. And they didn't know that the letter in my hand would change the story of this family forever. The night after the funeral, I couldn't sleep. The house felt too full of strangers, even though they were my own family. Every laugh from the living room cut through the walls like glass. They stayed up late, drinking, arguing over who would take which car, which property, which memory. At one point, I heard my daughter-in-law say, "She should really move out soon. That house is too big for one old woman." Someone laughed. Someone else agreed. I pressed my pillow over my ears. But the words still found me. Grief doesn't make people honest. It just shows who they really are when no one's pretending. The next morning, I came downstairs early. The dining table was covered in half-empty glasses and plates of leftover cake. My grandson's green stickers were still scattered everywhere. One was on the wall clock, one on the cabinet, one even on my husband's framed photo. My hands trembled as I peeled it off. The glue left a mark that wouldn't fade. I wiped it with my sleeve until the glass squeaked. I looked around the room and saw a life being divided before it was even cold. My husband had spent his years building something that was supposed to keep the family together. Instead, it was pulling them apart. He always said money would test our hearts one day. I guess that day had come. In the kitchen, the coffee pot was still warm. My son was there, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up when he spoke. "The lawyer called," he said. "The will reading is in 3 days. Try not to make it dramatic, all right? Everyone's tired." I wanted to ask him when he stopped being my son and started being my enemy, but the words wouldn't come. He didn't see me as his mother anymore, just a name on a document he thought would soon disappear. When he left the room, I sat at the table and took out the folded paper from my purse again. The letter, the one that held the truth they had all forgotten. My name was written there, clear and strong, beside my husband's. Not as a witness, not as a dependent, as a co-founder. 15 years ago, when the company was sinking, I sold my jewelry, my mother's gold bangles, even my wedding earrings. I wired the money quietly to save the business. They thought he saved it alone. He never told them I was the one who pulled it from the fire. I touched the letter and whispered to myself, they don't know yet, but they will. The morning sun slipped through the blinds, painting lines across the floor where my husband used to stand with his coffee. I sat at the same spot, staring at the old photo of us on the wall. We looked young, fearless, ready for the world. I remembered how his tie was always crooked, how I would fix it before he left for work. The man in that picture was proud, stubborn, and kind. But somewhere along the way, success hardened him, and silence hardened me. When the company almost collapsed, he came home one night defeated. His shoulders slumped, his eyes dark with worry. We're finished, he said quietly. The bank's ready to take it all. I still remember how I stood in that same kitchen, the smell of soup on the stove, pretending to stay calm. I didn't ask him how much. I didn't need numbers. I just asked, how long do we have? He didn't answer. That night, while he slept, I opened my jewelry box. The gold bangles my mother gave me, the emerald pendant I wore on my wedding day, even the earrings he bought me when our first child was born. I sold them all the next morning. The jeweler gave me an envelope thick with cash and a look of pity. I didn't care. I walked straight to the bank and wired the money into the company account. When he woke up, I told him to check the balance. He did, and for the first time in days, he smiled. He promised to pay me back. He never could. But I didn't need the money. I just needed him to survive the shame. Years later, when the company became a success story, when newspapers called him a genius, I watched from the sidelines. They praised his vision, his leadership, his brilliance. Not one word about the woman who sold her memories to keep his dream alive. I didn't mind then. Love makes silence feel noble, but love can also blind you to the cracks forming beneath your own feet. The will reading was 2 days away now. I folded the letter and placed it inside a wooden box on my bedside table. My husband once told me, if the day ever comes when they forget you, open it. I smiled faintly. That day had come. I ran my fingers over the lid and whispered, you always said the truth will speak for itself. Let's see if it still knows how. The morning of the will reading felt colder than it should have. California winters never used to bother me, but grief changes the way air feels on your skin. I woke up before dawn, made tea, and sat by the window, watching fog slide across the garden. The roses had wilted completely. Their petals clung to the soil like tired hands. I dressed slowly, in the same black dress from the funeral. It still smelled faintly of smoke from the cremation. I didn't bother fixing my hair. There was no one left to impress, only the truth to confront. When the car arrived, my son was already inside. He didn't greet me, just stared at his phone while I climbed in beside him. The silence between us was louder than any argument. Halfway to the lawyer's office, he said without looking up, let's just get this over with. I looked out the window and said nothing. He thought this day would be his victory lap. He had no idea the story he rehearsed in his head was about to end differently. The office was tall glass and quiet floors. Even the air smelled expensive. We were led to a room with a long table, 12 chairs, and one truth waiting to be unwrapped. My daughter-in-law took a seat beside him, crossing her legs neatly, already imagining what she would buy first. The cousins whispered and smiled, pretending to mourn, while their eyes stayed fixed on the lawyer's briefcase. Mr. Alden walked in a few minutes later, calm as always. He was my husband's lawyer for 30 years. He also knew more about me than anyone in that room realized. Thank you all for coming, he began. His voice carried authority, but no warmth. Today, we'll execute the final wishes of Mr. Raymond Whitlock. He opened the folder and glanced briefly at me before continuing. The gesture was small, but I caught it. It was our secret acknowledgement that this day had been waiting for years. He started reading. The usual formalities, dates, assets, holdings. People shifted impatiently in their chairs. And then he said my name. Not as next of kin, not as dependent, but as co-founder and co-beneficiary of the Whitlock Trust. The room froze. My son's head snapped toward me. His wife's smile faltered. Mr. Alden kept reading, steady as stone. My name appeared again and again. When he finished that section, the silence that followed was almost holy, and for the first time in a long while, I felt seen. My son leaned back in his chair, stunned. His face turned pale, like all the blood had slipped out at once. He forced a laugh, thin and sharp. "There must be a mistake," he said. "She didn't build anything. My father did." Mr. Alden didn't even look up. He flipped to another page and adjusted his glasses. Mr. Whitlock documented every financial contributor to his first company. Mrs. Whitlock's assets were the initial collateral. Without her, there would have been no company to pass down. The air thickened. You could almost hear greed choking on itself. My daughter-in-law cleared her throat. "So what exactly does that mean?" Mr. Alden's tone didn't change. "It means the estate is equally divided between Mrs. Whitlock and her late husband's heirs, in accordance with her documented share." He paused, glancing briefly at me. "There are also additional clauses, recordings, and statements, Mr. Whitlock." Whitlock asked to be played before any distribution can begin. He reached into his briefcase and took out a small black recorder. He pressed the button. My husband's voice filled the room, calm and weary, like the ocean at dusk. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone," the voice said. "If anyone has spoken ill of the woman who kept this family alive, they'll answer for every word." Someone gasped. It might have been my granddaughter. I couldn't look. My husband's voice continued, stronger now. "When I was young, I thought leadership meant standing in front. Later, I learned it meant standing because someone else was holding you up. That someone was your mother." The words settled like dust in the air. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. Even Mr. Alden stood still, letting the silence echo through every inch of that polished room. My son's fingers twitched on the armrest. He looked at me then, really looked. The same eyes I once kissed goodnight now stared at me like I was a stranger. But behind the shock, I saw something else. Fear. I folded my hands in my lap. Calm. I wasn't there for revenge. I was there for truth. He had used years to erase me quietly. Now I had one sentence, one document, one voice recording that brought me back louder than ever. The recorder clicked off. The lawyer looked up. "The next part," he said quietly, "is addressed directly to you, Mrs. Whitlock." Mr. Alden pressed play again. My husband's voice sounded softer this time. "Clara," he said, "if they are listening, let them finally hear what I could never say loud enough." I gripped the edge of the table. No one spoke. He continued, steady and clear. "When the company was drowning, she sold everything she had. She never told anyone. Not me, not the children. The jewelry her mother left her, the gold from our wedding, the savings she kept for her own peace. She used all of it to keep our doors open. So if you ever call her a burden, remember whose hands built your inheritance." The sound of paper rustling filled the room. He had paused on the tape to catch his breath before finishing. "I didn't give her enough credit in life, so I give her everything in death." The recorder clicked off again. I felt the room tilt slightly, as if the air itself shifted its loyalty. No one dared to move first. My son stared at the table, avoiding my eyes. His wife's face had gone blank, the kind of stillness people wear when they realize the ground beneath them just cracked. Mr. Alden set the recorder aside and spoke quietly. "As per Mr. Whitlock's written request, the controlling interest of Whitlock Holdings, the primary estate, and all related assets now fall under the sole ownership of Mrs. Clara Whitlock." The words sank into me slowly. I didn't smile. I just breathed. It wasn't triumph. It was release. For a moment, I saw my husband in my mind, his tired eyes, the way he always avoided direct apologies. He never learned how to say sorry with words. He did it through actions. This was his last one. My son finally looked up. He tried to speak, but the words stumbled out. "This can't be legal," he said weakly. Mr. Alden's calm never cracked. "It's perfectly legal," he replied, "and irreversible." I stood slowly. My knees ached, but my back stayed straight. "I'm going home," I said. My voice didn't shake. No one stopped me as I left the room. Their silence followed me all the way to the elevator. And for the first time in a long time, I felt taller than the building I was standing in. Outside, the air smelled like rain. I tilted my face to the sky and whispered, "You kept your promise, Raymond." The sky was gray when I reached home. The driveway looked different without his car parked by the garden. The roses were drooping, their petals bruised by the wind. I walked past them slowly, tracing one leaf with my finger. He used to say those roses would outlive us both. I guess he was half right. Inside, the house was too quiet. Even the clock in the hallway had stopped ticking. The neon stickers were still there, bright and ugly. Mine, mine, mine. I stood in the doorway and just stared. For years I had cleaned this floor, polished these cabinets, folded the curtains so the sunlight would fall softly across the piano. Now the home I built had been marked like a warehouse. I started pulling the stickers off, one by one. Some tore easily, others left behind bits of glue that clung to the wood. I didn't stop until my hands were sticky and red. The sound of peeling paper filled the room like rain. When the last one came off, I stood there in the silence that followed. The furniture seemed to breathe again. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. The reflection in the window looked older, yes, but stronger too. The letter and recordings had done what my voice never could. They made them see me. They made them remember I was part of every wall, every dollar, every plan. The phone rang. I let it ring. I knew who it was. My son wouldn't wait long before calling, trying to fix what he had broken. When it stopped, I took a deep breath and walked to my husband's study. His chair was still there, the leather cracked from years of use. I sat down slowly and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was an envelope I had never touched before. My name was written across it in his handwriting. I hesitated, then opened it. The letter was short. "You were always the heart." They forgot. I made sure they would remember. "Don't let this house die with me. Use it the way you wanted to." I folded the paper carefully and pressed it to my chest. The tears came quietly, not out of sadness, but out of peace. He had known all along that this moment would come. He had known I'd need a reason to stay strong when the house felt too empty. Outside, the rain began to fall. Gentle at first, then steady. I stood by the window, watching the drops slide down the glass. It felt like the house was finally washing itself clean. The rain stuck some time before dawn. The air smelled new, like the world had been rinsed and left to dry. I made tea and sat by the window in my husband's study, the letter still open beside me. The quiet didn't bother me anymore. It felt like the house was finally resting. By mid-morning, a car pulled into the driveway. I didn't need to look to know it was my son. He didn't call first. He never did. I waited at the kitchen table while he let himself in. His footsteps were hesitant this time, slower, almost careful. The door creaked, and then he appeared in the doorway, still wearing the same suit from yesterday, tie undone, eyes tired. "Mom," he said softly. I didn't answer right away. I poured another cup of tea, set it in front of him, and said, "You remember how you liked it. No sugar." He looked down, maybe embarrassed that I still remembered. He sat, but his posture was heavy, like guilt sitting on his shoulders. "I didn't know about the money," he said after a moment. "I didn't know about what you did back then." His voice was low, but it trembled at the edges. "Dad never told me." I nodded slowly. He wasn't supposed to. I asked him not to. He frowned. "Why? You could have—" "I didn't need credit," I interrupted. "I needed my family to survive. That was enough." He ran a hand through his hair. "You think I deserve any of it?" I looked at him for a long time before speaking. "Do you?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence between us said enough. For the first time, I noticed the lines on his face, the small ones near his eyes that hadn't been there before. Maybe grief had carved them overnight, or maybe truth had. Either way, he looked smaller than I remembered. Not weaker, just human again. I'll make things right, he said. I sighed. You can't rewrite the past, but you can stop repeating it. He nodded, swallowing hard. What do you want me to do? I leaned back, my eyes drifting toward the window where the wet roses bent in the morning light. Start by watering the garden, I said softly. Your father planted those for you. He stared at me, confused at first, then nodded. Without another word, he walked outside, took the old watering can, and began. Through the glass, I watched him kneel beside the rosebush. His hands were shaking, but the water poured steady. For the first time in years, he looked like my son again. You stayed outside longer than I expected. The rain had soaked the soil, but he still watered every rose, one at a time. When he finally came back in, his shoes were muddy and his cuffs were wet. He didn't seem to care. He just stood there, quiet, like a man trying to learn how to speak differently. I poured him more tea. He didn't touch it right away. His eyes wandered around the kitchen, tracing the old walls, the curtains, the shelves lined with photos he hadn't noticed in years. He paused at one picture, his father holding him as a baby, both of them laughing. I saw his lips tremble slightly. He whispered, I forgot this photo existed. You forgot a lot of things, I said gently. Maybe that's why you got lost. He didn't argue. He just nodded, like someone finally listening after too long. There was something in his face I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Humility. Not the kind that begs for forgiveness, but the kind that learns. I'm sorry, he said again. The words were small, almost afraid to exist. I said terrible things. I thought you were just waiting to die. I stared at him for a moment, then looked down at my hands. They all think that, I said quietly. Old people are only visible when there's money to take or property to claim. But we carry everything that built them. He nodded again, slower this time. Dad knew it, didn't he? Yes, I said. He knew. That's why he made sure the truth had my name on it. He took a long breath. I don't deserve forgiveness. Maybe not yet, I replied. But you can earn peace. That's better. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, staring at the steam from his untouched cup. What do I do, Mom? I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. You start with people who need help, not things that make you look rich. Go where your voice doesn't matter and let your hands do the talking. He was quiet. Then he nodded. I will. Before he left, he stopped at the door. Do you still have the key to Dad's old desk? I smiled faintly. It's in the study, second drawer on the right. When he was gone, I sat there alone, staring at the 2 cups of tea. The one untouched was still warm. Maybe the house wasn't as empty as it used to be. The next morning came with an uneasy stillness. I woke up early, half expecting another call, another argument. But the phone didn't ring. Only the sound of birds returned, the first in weeks. I made breakfast for one. Toast, eggs, and tea. The house smelled like how it used to, before ambition filled it with noise. I ate slowly, letting the silence breathe. By mid-morning, I heard a car outside. 2 doors slammed. Voices followed. My granddaughter and her mother. I could tell from the tone they weren't here for kindness. They walked in without knocking. My daughter-in-law's heels clacked against the tiles like warnings. Clara, she said, her voice polite enough to hide the poison. I think we should talk about the house situation. I smiled faintly. Of course. Would you like some tea? She blinked, caught off guard, then waved her hand. No, thank you. This is serious. My granddaughter stayed near the doorway, pretending to check her phone. I looked at her, tall, confident, too young to understand how greed eats people alive. Her mother continued, You know, it would make things easier for everyone if you sold this place. You could live somewhere smaller, and the family could at least have something from the estate. I stirred my tea gently, letting the spoon tap against the cup. Something, I repeated softly. Yes, she said quickly. Something fair. Fair, I said again, smiling now. She didn't like that smile. She shifted in her chair. Your husband built this family, Clara. He'd want the legacy shared. I leaned forward just a little. My husband built it with my hands beside his, I said quietly. He left this house to me, not to your shopping list. Her cheeks flushed. You can't just... Yes, I said simply. I can. My granddaughter looked up from her phone, eyes wide. She had never seen me speak like that. I wasn't cruel. I was clear. They stayed a few minutes longer, trying to convince me with words wrapped in sugar. I let them talk. I'd spent a lifetime listening. When they left, I walked to the front door and locked it behind them. For the first time, I realized that locking the door didn't feel like keeping people out. It felt like keeping peace in. I looked around the quiet kitchen, the clean table, the sunlight resting on the floor. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a burden. It felt like it was mine again. The quiet after they left was deep and kind. I walked from room to room, touching the walls as if they were breathing with me again. Each creak of the floor sounded like the house remembering who it belonged to. For years, I'd cleaned it out of duty. Now, I was caring for it out of love. I opened the curtains wide. The morning light spilled across the furniture, golden and soft. The stickers were gone, but the faint marks where they had been were still visible. Little ghosts of greed. I didn't mind them. They were part of the story now. In the afternoon, I opened my husband's study again. The scent of old paper and leather met me like an old friend. On the desk sat his fountain pen, the one he always said wrote better letters than he ever could. I sat down and took out fresh stationery. For the first time, I began writing not to him, not to the family, but to myself. I wrote about the things I had learned. That love without respect is just silence. That money can turn kindness into currency. That truth doesn't need an audience to matter. Halfway through the page, the phone rang again. I sighed and reached for it. It was my grandson. Grandma? His voice was softer than usual. Yes, dear. I heard aught the will. Mom's been upset. But I just wanted to ask if I could come by. I paused. Why? I don't want anything, he said quickly. I just want to talk. I didn't trust the words yet, but something in his tone felt real. All right, I said. Come tomorrow. Thank you, he whispered. When I hung up, I looked back at the half-written letter. The last line I had written read, Maybe forgiveness isn't a gift. Maybe it's a garden. I smiled faintly. Maybe he was coming to plant something. That evening, I cooked soup. Not for company, just for the house. The smell of onions and rosemary filled the air. It felt like memory, gentle and alive. Before bed, I stood at the window again. My son's watering from yesterday had revived the roses. They were lifting their heads toward the moonlight, proud again. I whispered to the garden, That's more like it. Then I turned off the light and slept for the first time without fear. The next morning, sunlight crept across the floor like a soft visitor. I woke before the alarm, made tea, and opened the curtains. The roses outside were standing tall again. A small sign that not everything broken stays that way. By mid-morning, I heard footsteps on the porch. When I opened the door, my grandson stood there, hands in his pockets, no phone in sight. He looked nervous, like a child caught doing something good for once. Come in, I said softly. He stepped inside, looking around like he hadn't really seen the house before. It's smaller than I remembered, he said. No, I replied. You just grew. He smiled a little and followed me to the kitchen. I poured him a cup of tea, though I doubted he drank tea. He stared at the steam, trying to find words. Finally, he said, Grandma, I was wrong. All of us were. I didn't know the things you did for the company, for Dad, for all of us. I didn't interrupt. Sometimes silence is the only way to make someone hear themselves. He continued, voice shaking. I said awful things. About you. About how long you'd live. I can't believe I said them. He wiped at his face quickly, pretending it was just dust. I leaned forward and touched his hand lightly. People say ugly things when they think they'll never be held accountable, I said. What matters is whether you're the same person after you know better. He nodded, eyes down. I want to be better, he said quietly. I don't need money, Grandma. I just don't want to be like them anymore. His words caught something inside me, something small and hopeful. I had prayed for a change, not revenge, and here it was, sitting across from me, still learning how to speak. Then start with honesty, I said gently. You can't heal what you keep pretending didn't happen. He nodded again. Do you still have that picture of you and Grandpa in the garden? Yes, I said. Why? I want to frame it properly, he said. Put it back in the hallway. It's supposed to be there. That one sentence did more for me than any apology could. He wasn't trying to erase guilt. He was trying to rebuild something. When he left, I walked him to the door. He hugged me before I could say goodbye. The last time he did that, he was 10, and for a moment, time folded, and everything cruel felt a little less permanent. That night, I sat in the living room with the framed photo he had mentioned. It was old, the edges faded, but the smiles were still strong. He had been right. It belonged in the hallway. I wiped the dust off the glass and hung it back where it had always been. The space instantly felt warmer, like the house had remembered its own heart. The next few days passed quietly. No arguments, no more calls demanding shares or property. Just silence and the occasional sound of birds resting on the porch. Peace doesn't come fast, but when it does, it arrives like a whisper. On the fourth day, a letter came in the mail. The handwriting was my son's. I hesitated before opening it. Inside, the words were shaky, uneven, almost like he wrote them in one sitting. He said he was volunteering at the hospice near the river. He said he'd started helping an old man named Carl, who didn't have anyone left. He said it made him think of me. I read it twice, then pressed the paper to my chest. The anger that had lived inside me for months began to melt, slow and quiet. People change when truth finally corners them, not before. Maybe he was starting to understand what love looks like when it's hard. Later that afternoon, I walked to the garden with a small watering can. The soil was still damp from yesterday's rain, but I watered anyway. It wasn't about need. It was about ritual. When I was done, I saw something small pushing through the dirt near the fence. A new rosebud, deep red. It wasn't there the day before. I smiled and whispered, "You're right on time." Inside the house, I started cleaning again, not out of frustration this time, but pride. I opened the curtains wide, let the sunlight touch every corner. For years, this place had been full of noise and bitterness. Now it smelled like life again. Before going to bed, I called Mr. Alden. "Could you help me set up a trust?" I asked. He paused. "Another one?" "Yes," I said. "But this time, not for me. For women who were forgotten in their own homes." He smiled through the phone. "You're a remarkable woman, Clara." I looked at the roses swaying outside and said softly, "No, I'm just one who finally remembered herself." The next week moved gently, like a chapter that didn't want to rush. Mr. Alden helped me set up the trust. We called it the Quiet Hands Fund. It was for women who had built in silence, who had worked behind doors that history forgot. I didn't want a big office or a press release, just a bank account and a promise. When the paperwork was done, Mr. Alden asked, "What should the first grant go toward?" I didn't have to think. "Education," I said, "for women who stopped studying because someone told them their dreams weren't practical." He smiled. "Your husband would have been proud." I looked down at my hands. "Maybe, but I think he'd be more proud that I finally am." That night, my grandson came over again. He brought a small notebook filled with sketches and names. "I've been thinking," he said shyly, "what if we made a website for your foundation? We could share the stories of those women." His enthusiasm made me laugh softly. "Since when do you care about stories?" He grinned. "Since I realized I'm part of the wrong one." We spent hours at the kitchen table, him explaining how online donations worked, me suggesting names for future scholarships. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about meaning. Every line we wrote felt like stitching something torn. A few days later, my daughter-in-law called. Her voice was quieter than I remembered. "I heard about what you're doing," she said. "I'd like to help. Maybe organize something for the fund." I almost didn't recognize her tone. It wasn't sharp or defensive, just tired, maybe even sincere. "All right," I said, "but only if you mean it." "I do," she said. "I think I finally understand what family is supposed to mean." After the call, I sat by the window, watching the garden. The new rosebud had bloomed, bright red. It leaned toward the sunlight, bold and alive. It reminded me that even things once ignored can bloom beautifully when given one more chance. That evening, I cooked dinner for myself. Simple food: soup, bread, and a bit of laughter with the memory of those who weren't here anymore. The house didn't echo with emptiness now. It echoed with peace. Before bed, I added a new entry to the trust files. "Purpose is the real inheritance." I underlined it twice. The foundation had grown faster than I imagined. Letters arrived from women all across the country: teachers who'd lost their jobs, mothers who'd left school too soon, widows starting small businesses from their kitchens. They all wrote the same thing: "Thank you for remembering us." One envelope came with a photograph: a woman in her 50s standing beside a classroom chalkboard, a dozen smiling girls around her. Spring came early that year. The air was soft again, and the garden smelled like forgiveness. Every morning I walked barefoot on the porch, letting the wood warm under the sun. The roses were blooming in every shade: red, pink, yellow, each one a quiet proof that life finds a way back. On the back she'd written, "You gave me the courage to go back." I kept that photo on my kitchen wall. It reminded me that healing isn't loud, it's steady. My son visited sometimes, not every week, but enough. He helped with the accounting for the trust, still awkward but softer now. Once, he caught me reading on the porch and said, "You look happy." I looked up from my book. "I am," I told him. "Not because everything's perfect, but because I stopped needing it to be." He smiled at that, the kind of smile that carried understanding. He helped me water the garden that day without being asked. No more words, just quiet work. Sometimes that's how love apologizes, with action. One evening, my grandson brought a tablet to show me the website he'd finished. The homepage showed my husband and me in the garden, side by side, smiling. Below it, the words read, "The story began with two hands that never stopped building." I felt tears rise, but they weren't sad ones. They were full of light. When they left, I sat alone on the porch as the sun went down. The sky was gold and lavender. The wind carried the smell of new blooms. I thought about all the years I had been quiet, about how long it took for truth to find its voice. I realized something then. Silence isn't weakness. It's just waiting for the right moment to speak. And when it finally does, it doesn't whisper. It changes everything. I looked out at the roses one last time and whispered to the air, "We bloom again." The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt alive, and so was I.